What is up, everybody? Yellowstone Wolf here, and in this video, we're going to be doing something controversial for a change. We're going to be talking about aliens, interdimensional entities, UFOs, UAPs, all that good stuff. And the reason why I decided to do this video is because, in all honesty, I haven't heard anybody really talk about the facts and like what these things are. And I've always wanted to know, like, what the fuck are aliens? Okay, what is this idea of interdimensional entities? What are flying saucers? Why are these things here? Why have they been throughout our ancient cultures, like all over the globe for millennia? What is going on here? And so I did hours and hours, hundreds of hours of investigation and research. I've done hundreds of hours of meditation. Okay, I've investigated almost every single nook and cranny of ancient civilizations and the common things that they had, the things they had in common, the common threads in all of their mythologies and yada yada yada. And I finally got an answer. Woo! Everybody! I got an answer, and it really revolves all around shamanism. How about that, eh? The oldest religion in the world is the right religion. How about that, eh? And what I mean by right religion is that it's actually like the root of all religions. Shamanism is the root of all religions because it understands what reality is and how it works and why it works the way that it does. Okay? So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about the shamanic understanding of aliens, interdimensional entities, UFOs, UAPs, and how all these things interrelate. Okay? So hopefully I've given you plenty to chew on as I move on. All right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint presentation here and get started, shall we? So let's begin with the idea that you have to understand that when it comes to ETs, when it comes to extraterrestrials, aliens, interdimensional entities, whatever you want to call it there, when it comes to all that stuff, you have to understand that these things are like multiple layers deep. Okay, we're talking about things like sacred sites. Okay, the UFOs, UAPs, aliens, non-human intelligences are often associated with sacred sites. Okay, they're often associated with doorways or portals of energy or hyperdimensional gateways or stargates. Okay, we're also talking about like psychic phenomena here. Okay, shape-shifting, levitation, telekinesis, telepathy. Okay, all of these things are interrelated, just like ghosts and ancestor spirits, okay, or the spirits of the planet. Okay, all of these things interrelate with one another. Okay, and the common ground, the common intersection where they all meet, where they all interrelate, is consciousness. Okay, yes, consciousness. Okay, and what is consciousness? Well, I'd like to explain quite simply what consciousness is. Consciousness is energy. Okay, well, what is energy, Jake? Everybody knows that everything is energy, but what is energy? Well, energy is light resonating on all frequencies of vibration, creating a whole that is greater than the sum of all of its parts. Okay, so energy or consciousness is basically all things wrapped into a single package, creating a conscious whole that is greater than the sum of all of the infinite things within itself. Okay? And so that's what consciousness is, that's what energy is, and that's why all of these phenomena that are these seemingly different masks are all interrelating and meeting at the same intersection, at the same crossroads, which is consciousness. Everybody, the thing, the glue that connects all species, which is mind, consciousness, the soul. That is the crossroads. That is the medium or the meeting point for which all of this phenomena intersects and interrelates. Okay, so with that said, let's move on, shall we? This archetype of the gray alien is an archetype that has been pervasive throughout all of our ancient cultures, but it is not the only archetype that is pervasive throughout all our ancient cultures. Okay, so with that said, We're going to move on. Come on then. I pressed the button. Okay, there we go. So it's important to understand that in order to comprehend how all this ET stuff works, in order to like really grasp how this interdimensional stuff works, you have to keep in mind that all of reality is based off of a single fractal design. Okay, and the single fractal design is the tetrahedron structure of space and the flower of life field of the soul. Okay, so it is the two of these, matter and mind, or physical and metaphysical, both of these things layering on top of one another to create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, right? That creates all reality. Okay, now at the center of every single fractal flower of life tetrahedron pattern is this pattern here. Okay, it is called the vector equilibrium. And the vector equilibrium is basically made when two equally powerful forces meet and collide. And because they're equally powerful, they basically just start rotating around one another, and they create a stable structure in space and time. This stable structure in the dimensions of space and time is called a vector equilibrium. And as these equally powerful forces rotate around another, this is called the double torus field. Okay, it's because it's these two bulls locking horns, two toruses locking horns and spinning around each other. Okay, it is this double torus energy that is creating this hyperdimensional energy field. Okay, so at the core of all things is the hyperdimensional energy that we just spoke of. Okay, and it is at the core of all frequencies, of all vibrations. All right, and it is what makes up all of reality. All right, and reality is nothing more than numerous different vector equilibriums and double torus fields layered on top of one another in different hyperdimensional layers of energy. So there's going to be a 12th dimensional layer, or 12th dimensional vector equilibrium and double torus field that ends up creating all the other 11 dimensions below it. Okay, and all based off of the same math, based off of the same structure, which is the double torus field flower of life tetrahedron structure. Okay, so hopefully I've explained that well enough to move on. Now, if you want a little bit more in-depth analysis on this, or in-depth explanation, I highly recommend you check out my God is Real and Reincarnation is Physics video, because that one is quite mind-blowing, and I'm very proud of it, very much indeed. Okay, there's all sorts of wonderful things in that video. If you haven't checked it out, by all means, check it out if you want to look into this idea of hyperdimensional energy and the idea of the fractal nature of reality and how it all interrelates. Okay, so with that said, I'm moving on. So in order to understand the extraterrestrial, alien, UAP, UFO, paranormal activity type phenomena, we have to understand that what we're talking about here is the movement of energy. Okay, the movement of energy through space and time, through the dimensions of space and time. And because this energy is conscious, okay, because this energy is conscious as it moves through space and time, it ends up creating different physical bodies that embody this consciousness. Okay, and as that process unfolds, as the energy moves through the feedback, through the universe and back to itself, through the dimensions of space and time and back to source, this is what we call the life and death cycle. Okay, and all organisms experience it. Everybody, we all get going back to source at some point. So when it comes to UAPs, when it comes to UFOs, when it comes to aliens, when it comes to interdimensional entities, we have to remember that it all relates to consciousness, and thusly it relates to the life and death cycle. And in order to understand what star knowledge is, what who our star ancestors were, why they were here, what exactly it is that they were trying to do when life got started on this planet, etc., you have to understand the life and death cycle, and you have to understand the laws of physics and the way that reality works. And it all works based off of same fractal geometry like I explained before. Okay, it's actually quite simple. But what's happened is that we've had numerous different veils put in front of our minds and in front of our eyes to obscure the truth, to cloud reality as it actually is. And if you want a little on that, I suggest you watch my Take the Red Pill video. Trust me on that, that's a good one. That one really goes into depth as to how all of these veils have been put in front of our eyes, put in front of our minds to cover up the truth about reality and our own potential as living spiritual beings of infinite potential. So moving on. Did you know that the pineal gland becomes visible in the human fetus at 49 days? Which is the number of days in which it takes the soul to reincarnate according to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So this 49-day process of all the different phases that you have to go through after you die is the exact, it parallels the exact same amount of time that it takes for a human fetus to develop, and for the pineal gland, the gland that's in the center of your brain, okay, that's called the third eye, okay, for this thing to develop in the fetus and for DMT to be excreted in the fetus for the first time. Now, it is my assertion that when the DMT is excreted in the pineal gland of the fetus at 49 days, that is the incarnation of the soul into the flesh and form, okay? And it's because it takes 49 days to go through all of the phases, all the bardos after the death process, okay? So why is this 49-day thing, what's up with that? 7 times 7, that's interesting, huh? We'll get back to that in a little bit. But this whole idea of the 49 days paralleling each other with the death cycle and the life cycle. What is that? Well, what that is, ladies and gentlemen, is something that I call the feedback loop of light and information, okay? Now, bear with me here while I read this. Vibration, or animation, being alive, occurs when the frequency of an exciting external source, in this case, they're saying sunlight, matches the natural frequency of an animate or of a physical being. This is the condition of resonance. So according to what this is saying, this A+ here could be considered sunlight, and this B- here could be considered the human body or the human mind, okay? And all these different frequencies, all these different colors and waves are all the different frequencies of light that are being sent from the sun to human eyes and mind and back again, over and over and over again, okay? And this is the condition of resonance. This is what creates our perception of life and reality, okay? Now, I'm going to go a step further. All right, I'm going to say that this A+ here is actually something like the energy that we were talking about earlier, this hyperdimensional energy that is a whole greater than the sum of its parts. For the sake of argument, we'll just say that it's 12th dimensional omnipresent energy, okay? And this 12th dimensional omnipresent energy is permeating all of the different dimensions all the way down to the first and back again with itself based on its same fractal geometric structure like we talked about before, okay? And so all of these different wavelengths here, all of these different frequencies are essentially the different frequencies or octaves that light can resonate on and create matter in space and time, okay? And what we call reality is the conglomeration of all of these different atoms and molecules and all these things working themselves out and being perceived by our mind and our bodies, and that information being sent back to this hyperdimensional energy source that is at the core of all beings, as I said before, okay? The heart here is the center of our vector equilibrium in our body. We'll get to that a little bit later. Oh, burp. Oh, excuse me. So humanity is essentially a being with a hyperdimensional consciousness, okay? So we might as well have hyperdimensional consciousness here and hyperdimensional consciousness here, and all of the infinite frequencies and resonances and vibrations and all that stuff of all the universe is being sent and received by this hyperdimensional consciousness. So basically what we're looking at here is self-reflection. We're looking at like a cosmic self-reflective process, okay? So with that said, all of these different frequencies are like different atoms or different atomic bonds and stuff like that in space and time. All right. Now, if we look at this red line here, for example, and we say that this, we'll just say for the sake of argument that this red line here is this pattern down here, this triangular pattern looking here. Okay. Now, this triangular pattern here is a pattern created through something called cymatics. If you don't know what cymatics is, you can look into it. It's basically the use of frequency and sound to manipulate matter, okay? To manipulate matter to create certain patterns in space and time. Now, because this frequency is based off of harmonics, because it's based off of harmonics, it is also based off of mathematics. And as it moves through the feedback loop of light and information, as it goes through the feedback loop and back to source again, it has a very specific mathematical signature that creates a very specific mathematical pattern in the dimensions of space and time. Okay, so what we're looking at here and with all these cymatic patterns essentially is a two-dimensional representation of a three or fourth dimensional or fifth dimensional field. Okay, so what we're talking about here is a hyperdimensional field that is manipulating matter to create certain patterns in space and time. Now, if we were to look at these two-dimensional patterns as three-dimensional fields, then maybe this, oh, hey, maybe this triangular pattern here would turn into this pyramid pattern here. Okay, and maybe some of like this square looking pattern here would manifest as a cube here. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now, as the frequency heightens, this is where it gets really interesting. As the frequency heightens, as the frequency gets higher and higher and higher in its resonance, the patterns end up becoming more and more and more complex, which means that the three-dimensional fields that are creating them are also getting more and more and more complex. Okay, and as these fields get more and more complex, they manipulate matter in different ways, okay, creating different elements. Okay, and the conglomeration or the mixing together of different patterns, these here are called platonic solids, by the way. If you don't know what a platonic solid is, it's basically the fundamental sacred geometric structure of all reality, and these platonic solids were rediscovered by Plato, but they've been around for millennia. You have to, like, these are like the fundamental basis of all reality. Okay, so Plato just kind of rediscovered them and reintroduced them to the ancient Greeks. So that's why we call them platonic solids. Now, no matter what way you hold each and every one of these shapes, it is the exact same shape. Just like a sphere. If you were to hold a sphere in your hand, it doesn't matter which way you hold it, it's still a sphere. Okay, just like a cube. It doesn't matter which way you hold a cube, it's the same shape. Okay, and it is all of these shapes, all of these hyperdimensional fields that are creating the elements and molecules and atoms and all that stuff based off of frequencies and quarks and all that. It's how all these things interrelate and intersect and interconnect with one another that creates all of reality as we're experiencing it. Okay, and our body is made up of all of these elements. Wow, right? Okay, so with all that said, I hope I've explained that well enough to move on. Okay, what is happening here? This feedback loop is essentially what this whole idea of Ouroboros is all about. Okay, and that's why this image has been just pushed by ancient cultures for millennia. Okay, now why is this happening? What is up with this Ouroboros of energy? Why is consciousness folding in on itself over and over and over again in this way? Okay, and it's because what is happening is every time energy goes through the feedback loop of light and information and back to source again and again and again, every time that happens, the universe is going through a metamorphosis process and becoming a grander and grander version of itself, a more awake, a more aware, a more loving, more sincere, a more compassionate, something with more care, okay, being each and every moment. Okay, so the Ouroboros of energy, this feedback loop of light and information, is creating a spiritual metamorphosis of sorts that is constantly creating a better, more evolved version of the self, or of this hyperdimensional consciousness that is the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, and what ends up happening is that as this process unfolds, not only does that growth, not only does all the growth from all the dimensions, like say from the first dimension all the way up to the 12th, not only does all that growth get contributed to this 12th dimensional consciousness, but then that 12th dimensional consciousness can end up becoming something like a 13th dimensional consciousness. Okay? So with that said, hopefully you grasp this idea of this feedback loop, Lighten information, the idea that it's all based off of the same fractal geometry, the idea that this Ouroboros is essentially the universe informing itself, or it basically is a self-reflective, self-informing process. Okay? Oh, you hear that synchronicity? That's my clock going off. All right, so with that said, what we're talking about here is standing waves when it comes to what we're talking about here in this feedback loop of Lighten information is the creation of numerous different standing waves. Okay, so as information travels through the feedback loop of Lighten information and back again, okay, it's creating what is called an interference pattern or a standing wave. Now, standing wave is what happens when two equally powerful rivers, or double torus fields, two equally powerful rivers converge and meet one another and become one river. Now, as they become that one river, there is a wave in the center that is called a standing wave. Okay? And this standing wave, right, is something that we call a physical human body or a planet or a sun or yada, yada, yada. Okay? So, now, there's numerous ways that this can be looked at, okay? So this energy moving through the feedback loop of Lighten information can be looked at numerous different ways. It can be looked at as energy coming from the cosmic to the quantum and from the quantum to the cosmic, or it can be viewed as energy moving from the future to the past and past to the future. And if you don't believe that energy can move from the future to the past, I suggest you look into tachyons, because tachyons are subatomic quantum particles that travel backward through what we perceive as time. Okay, so energy can move from the future to the past, and just as energy is moving from the past to the future. Okay, and in the process, a standing wave is created in the center here. Okay, so as energy or hyperdimensional spirit, whatever you want to call it, moves through the feedback loop into our bodies and back again, okay, we're creating a standing wave of energy. Okay, and here at the heart, here at the center is our heart. Okay, so our heart is like the center of the universe. The universe is an infinite sphere whose circumference is, whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Try that again. The universe is an infinite sphere whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. Okay, so yes, you are the center of the universe. You are the center of your universe. Take responsibility for it. With that said, let's move on. So what we're talking about here is this idea of standing waves, energy moving through the feedback loop of Lighten information, is something that is happening on a hyperdimensional scale, okay? From like a 12th dimensional scale to an 11th dimensional scale, okay? To a 10th dimensional scale, to something like maybe a 9th, okay? Getting all the way down to the 7th and the 8th, and all the way down to the 3rd dimension of reality. Okay, so this fractal geometric nature to our reality is creating numerous different standing waves in space and time. Okay, and these numerous different standing waves in space and time are like different octaves, okay, in the pattern of creation, in the harmonies of creation. Okay, so human beings are essentially like a vessel for this hyperdimensional divine consciousness, as explained before. Okay, and what we're looking at when we look out into the stars and we see the Milky Way and all those stars in front of us, what we're looking at is a hyperdimensional version of the feedback loop of Lighten information. Okay, and that's why it blows our minds. That's why we have all these stories about, you know, the stars and all the stuff that goes on in the heavens and star beings and all that kind of stuff, okay? Because it's all, the cosmos is conscious, you guys. The cosmos is conscious, just like, guess what? The Earth is conscious, the solar system, the sun, our galaxy, the multiverse itself, it's conscious, okay? And we embody that consciousness, okay? And the more conscious of it we become, then the more of it we embody, okay? So what is moving energy from these really, really high frequency, hyperdimensional standing waves of energy in space and time? What is moving them from this hyperdimensional state all the way down to us? What's moving it is vortexes of energy. Now, a vortex is a constantly spinning, constantly rotating flow of energy that is taking, basically it's the double torus field, like I explained before. Okay, and remember how all reality is comprised of numerous different double torus fields and hyperdimensional scales, things that we call galaxies and stars. These are just vortexes. These are just hyperdimensional vortexes and portals for energy, for consciousness. Okay, so what we're talking about here essentially is the movement of energy through the feedback loop of light and information based on numerous different standing waves being created at different hyperdimensional levels of reality. And these different hyperdimensional levels of reality create different levels of consciousness and conscious beings. Okay? So yes, the universe is conscious. Yes, our planet is conscious. Yes, the sun is conscious. All the planets are conscious. Our ancestors knew this a long time ago. Okay, trust me. That's why they had this like mythology of like the gods and stuff like that, because they understood the idea that the planets were conscious. Okay, that the universe itself is conscious of itself. Okay, and it moves energy through the dimensions of space and time, through the feedback loop of light and information based on harmonics, through the use of vortexes of varying different sizes and scales. Okay, and these vortexes are basically just the movement of energy through the feedback loop and back to source again. Okay, so this is kind of where we get into this whole idea of stargates. Okay, this is where we get into this whole idea of extraterrestrial intelligences. Okay, because if our planet is conscious, then is it possible that maybe, just maybe, we might be communicating with our planetary consciousness as much as we're communicating with beings from Zeta Reticuli or something? So what's important to understand is that these vortexes are causing everything to spin. Everything in the universe is all based off of spin. It's all based off of the movement of energy through the feedback loop of light and information. Okay, that's why we have the sacred spiral pattern, the Fibonacci spiral pattern, on all scales of existence, you guys. Whether it be storms and hurricanes, tornadoes, the shape of a wave, of a whirlpool, of aloe vera, of broccoli, of a shell, of a seed, of our DNA, of an atom, of, you know, our galaxy, of our solar system, of the multiverse itself. It's all spinning because energy is flowing through all of it. Conscious energy, the conscious energy of God, is flowing through all of it. Okay? So, with that said, what is happening then here on this planet is that the feedback loop of light and information, which is essentially, you know, energy being sent through the feedback loop of light and information, creating a standing wave, right? Numerous different octaves, numerous different frequencies, numerous different standing waves of hyperdimensional energy, okay? And these numerous different frequencies and octaves of hyperdimensional energy are creating and coalescing different cosmic bodies, and eventually they create a plane of consciousness that physical beings, human beings, i.e. human beings, can operate on. That basically this hyperdimensional consciousness can house a body or an antenna for this signal of this hyperdimensional awareness. Okay, so the feedback loop of light and information is hyperdimensional energy going to hyperdimensional energy and back again in this self-reflective process. And it is creating a standing wave or a plane of consciousness in our case, where there are conscious beings, like an infinite amount of conscious beings, interestingly enough. Okay, like there's, you know, not just humans here, right? We have life forms all the way down to tardigrades, for Christ's sake, and all the way up to our planetary consciousness. Okay, so these planes of consciousness have beings that are also like standing waves. Our body is a standing wave in the cosmic ocean. Okay, and it is a self-aware standing wave in the cosmic ocean. Okay, now interestingly enough, what makes this reality that we perceive, okay, is the layering, as I said before, of numerous different frequencies of energy, or numerous different platonic solids layering on top of one another. In the case of fire, that's the tetrahedron. In the case of the hexahedron, we have earth. The octahedron, we have air. The icosahedron, we have water. And the dodecahedron, we have ether. Okay? And how all of these things interrelate, how they all intersect, how they all intertwine, how they all create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, is what is basically creating human existence, what's creating our reality. Okay, so human beings are all of these things combined to create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, just like a sunflower is, just like a galaxy is. Okay, it's all based off of the double torus field. It's all based off of the flower of life pattern and the movement of energy through the feedback loop of light and information based off of the flow of energy through vortexes in space and time. Okay, so human beings are essentially like a standing wave of energy. Okay, and we embody the flower of life tetrahedron pattern with our chakras and our auric field. Okay, so essentially human beings are like a fractal version, or like a standing wave of the universe. We are like antenna for this universal mind, for this collective conscious mind. Okay, this oneness of all things. Okay, it's like the most advanced possible technology you could possibly imagine. Okay, and it's like, it's so deeply interwoven with like the harmonics of reality and the harmonics of the universe and all that stuff that it in many cases it's beyond most people's comprehension. Okay, but notice here we have the tetrahedron pattern. Okay, we have that, and obviously the star pattern, the 5-star pattern is something that is pervasive throughout all ET life forms. Okay, so with that said, the human body is like a physical standing wave of energy in space and time. Okay, and our body is comprised of the elements of the earth. So the elements of the earth and water comprised into this standing wave of energy that is conscious of itself. Okay, so with that said, what is sending the frequency? What is sending this blueprint? How do we get a life form, and how do we get this frequency being here on this planet? Like, how does this stuff work? Like, okay, I get it, it's all based off of the same fractal geometry and all that stuff, but like, how does this account for extraterrestrials? How does this account for interdimensional entities? How does this account for star knowledge and star beings and all that stuff? Allow me to explain. So the feedback loop of light and information is, as I said before, something that's happening on a hyperdimensional scale. Okay, which means that there's numerous different levels and numerous different layers of energy that are layering on top of one another to create this whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, which means that numerous different quote unquote races, or numerous different frequencies of energy, are going to be funneled through the vortex that we call our sun. Okay, and as the frequencies that are getting funneled through this vortex are permeated out into our solar system, okay, those light codes are then sent to the planets. Okay, and the planets then are like receivers. They're almost like antenna in and of themselves, right? They're different octaves for the feedback loop of light and information. They're like different octaves for this information to come in, right? And for conscious awareness, conscious experience to be embodied. Okay, now with that said, it's really important to grasp something. Okay, it's important to understand the way that light can end up affecting DNA. So there was this experiment done, and if you want, you can look into David Wilcock's book. I believe it's called The Ascension Mysteries, where he talks about how it is that light was able to be used to reprogram the DNA of frog eggs to turn them into salamander eggs. Yes, and these salamanders could actually like grow into adulthood and like procreate with other salamanders, when originally they started out as frog eggs. And how was this done? This was done through the use of lasers and genetics, okay, whereby the genetic code that was in the DNA of a salamander was transferred to an egg of a frog, and this egg of the frog ended up receiving this light code and this light information, and it changed the DNA on like a molecular level, frequency, energy, light, frequency, vibration. I hope it's all syncing up. Changed it on a molecular level to where now that frog egg could be converted into a salamander egg. How about that, eh? How about that? So that is huge. That is so huge, because that basically means that we are our genetic codes, who we are, our energy essence is like a frequency, not a physical body. Whoa, that's huge. In order to understand extraterrestrials, in order to understand interdimensional entities, in order to understand UFOs, UAPs, and all that stuff, you have to understand that you are a frequency of consciousness. You are not just a physical body. You are a frequency of consciousness that is housed in and around a physical body. Okay? And it is the movement of energy through the feedback loop of light and information that is creating your body on like a quantum and cosmic scale. Okay? So as energy moves from the cosmic hyperdimensional doorways and gateways through all these other lower dimensional frequencies and doorways into your physical body and back to source again, okay? As this process unfolds, you are the standing wave of the concrescence of the universal mind. You are like the cutting edge of the universal mind. This is huge. You're like you're all of the millions upon millions upon millions of billions of years of history of the cosmos fractalized into a little tiny grain of sun that we call a human body. How about that, eh? All right, so essentially, the human being, what we are, is a being of frequency, okay? And the physical body that we have here on this planet is comprised of the elements and the, H2O, the elements of the earth, being concretized into a single package that is a whole greater than the sum of its parts. What do I mean by that? Well, all the organs are working together as, little parts, but the whole of all of them working together creates a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, i.e. human consciousness. Okay? You can't live without all of your organs, right? So, what is it exactly that is bringing these frequencies? And it is the sun. Yes, whether or not you know it, the sun is a portal for hyperdimensional energy. Is a space travel based on sacred geometry. Okay, what we are talking about is the movement of conscious beings. Okay, the movement of consciousness. Okay, beings based on different octaves of awareness and self-reflection being embodied and housed in different physical bodies, okay? And the method of getting this conscious energy, this consciousness, this being from this hyperdimensional state of, say, 11th dimensional consciousness down to earth is done through what we call the sun, or this vortex here, this hyperdimensional vortex of energy. Okay, and if you don't believe that there's stuff coming out of the sun, that our sun is actually like a portal, then look at some of these pictures, man. Look at this here. This is like a UFO that's coming and like taking energy from the sun. This is like a being taking energy from the sun. Okay, this is like an ancient, I think it was like Mayan or Aztec plate or something like that. They have the sun, they have Earth, they have UFOs and starships and stuff. And now notice they out of the sun, they have this UFO looking thing coming. Okay? Notice, okay? The sun is a vortex of energy. It is a hyperdimensional vortex for energy. Conscious energy. Okay? This is huge. This is huge. I'll explain why in a little bit, okay? It's just really important to understand that if consciousness is a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, and it is fractalizing itself throughout all the different dimensions of reality based off of the same fractal structure, and it's doing so creating different levels or octaves of consciousness, then that means that our sun is conscious. That means that all of our planets are conscious. Okay, that means that they are as conscious of themselves as we are. Okay, so with that understanding, check this out. All right, this is the sun's tone. This is the sun's frequency, plotted out cymatically. Okay, now if you look, we have here at the center the sun, obviously, and all of these concentric rings around it. What are these rings, Jake? Well, allow me to explain. You see, look at Mercury here. If you see Mercury's pattern is very, very similar to the sun's pattern, then it would make sense why, considering how close Mercury's frequency or how close Mercury's body is to the sun. It's like right next to it. So of course it's going to embody a frequency that is very much like the sun's frequency. Notice the little like barbs and stuff you got on here. You got these little barbs here, the concentric rings, right? Concentric rings. All right. Now, notice here we have Venus. Okay, so Venus obviously is much different than Mercury because, you know, they're totally different portions of the solar system. Okay, so basically Venus is occupying a different octave of the solar vortex's frequency range, of the feedback loop of light and information that is creating our sun in this hyperdimensional plane of existence that we call the solar system. Okay, the Venus, the Earth, okay, Jupiter, Mars, all of it, these are all different octaves in our solar system. Okay, this is huge. This is huge. Okay, because what does this mean? What this means is this, and if you really want to understand extraterrestrial life, you have to grok this. Okay, if this is Earth's frequency is, for example, is right here. Okay, what is creating our physical bodies on this plane of consciousness, on this hyperdimensional frequency, on this hyperdimensional field of consciousness? What is creating our bodies is the exact same laws of physics that created the planet, the sun, the galaxy, everything, the universe itself. Okay, so the standing wave of the physical human body is based off of the laws of physics as they permeate all of the galaxy, as they permeate all of the solar system. Okay, being like compressed and concretized to our physical plane of existence. And then the Earth's elements, namely H2O and all the other elements, are then comprised into a package, a conscious package, a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, with a hyperdimensional field of consciousness that we call an aura, okay, or an electromagnetic field, or a consciousness field. Okay, now if we go to somewhere like Venus, Venus is not made of water the way that Earth is, but that doesn't mean that there isn't life on Venus that isn't based off of something like, say, sulfur or silica. Okay, just because we are carbon H2O based life forms here on planet Earth doesn't mean that on Venus they're all carbon based H2O based life forms. Okay, if the same laws of physics that created our bodies here on Earth are the same laws of physics that created Venus, then it seems to me only a matter of course that there would be beings, frequency beings. Remember, we are frequencies of consciousness, much more than we are our physical bodies. Okay, then to me it would just make sense that there would be beings of frequency and consciousness on Venus who maybe have bodies that don't look the way that ours does, because it's not based off of H2O. It's not based off of the minerals and the elements of the Earth. Okay, it's not carbon-based, but that doesn't mean that there isn't life there. That doesn't mean that this self-reflective hyperdimensional consciousness process, this growth process that all the universe is based off of, all of a sudden stops when it gets to Venus and just starts right up when it gets to Earth. Doesn't make very much sense, does it? Doesn't make so much sense at all. The life is everywhere, everywhere. All cultures have said everything is alive. All cultures have said everything has a spirit. The only culture that hasn't, modern materialist culture, which in many cases is based off of like things like modern materialism, Darwinism, okay, which by the way, Darwin was into the dark side of the occult, okay? He was into, you know, all sorts of like Luciferian satanic stuff, okay? So the idea of life existing on other planes or other worlds is only a matter of course when we understand what life actually is. And life is the conscious energy of the cosmos, the whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, being moved through the feedback loop of light and information, going from different frequencies and different planes or different octaves of self-awareness and back to self again, back to source again. Okay? So Mars is not as anywhere near as a complex of a frequency as something like Venus. And if we go to something like Jupiter, look at that frequency. Now it would make sense why Jupiter is associated with all of the highest frequencies of humanity. Things like, you know, justice, things like love, things like friendship, things like strength, perseverance, freedom, everything that makes humans good, you can pretty much associate with Jupiter, okay? So it would make sense why humanity associates all of our best attributes with Jupiter, because whether or not you know it, everything is interconnected. Everything is intertwined with one another, which means that our physical bodies, our minds, and all that stuff, whether or not you know it, yes, it is connected to Jupiter, just like it's connected to Venus, just like it's connected to the moons and the moon cycles. Who made that, eh? Now it would make sense why it is that human social systems are so drastically affected by either the new or the full moons. Okay, because these frequencies of energy are what are affecting the planet Earth itself. And if it's affecting the planet Earth's frequency, you better believe it's affecting your frequency, okay? Now, this here is Sirius. This is the star system Sirius. Look at how high frequency that is. Now, remember what we were talking about higher octaves of consciousness, about other worlds, other planes of existence? All right, this is what we're talking about here. This is a higher dimensional plane of existence. And there is a reason why our ancient ancestors had ceremonies and had very specific rituals of sorts and plants they would consume at certain locations, sacred sites, when they would quote unquote worship or get in tune with this star frequency. Okay, which basically means that they were embodying this high octave frequency through the cosmic feedback loop and down to earth, through the sun, down to earth, into their physical bodies, so that they could essentially embody the collective consciousness of this star system. Whoa! So this is where this whole idea of, you know, star knowledge comes from. This whole idea of we come from the stars. This is where this idea comes from. But we're going to get into that in just a little bit, okay? Because it goes a whole lot deeper than everything I'm just saying right now. Okay, so ultimately what we have to understand is this. There are about this many atoms in your body. I don't even know what number that would be. There are about this many atoms in your body, all right? And all are billions of years old. And at the deepest level, you are the universe in human form. Okay? So, like I said, we are beings of consciousness. Okay? We are beings of frequency and energy before we are actually physical beings of reality. Okay? So, well, I should say we are beings of frequency and energy just as much as we are beings of physical reality. Because what's really interesting is that the human body, this conglomeration of all these atoms that are billions of years old and the universe representing itself as you, that's like an antenna for this hyperdimensional frequency, this hyperdimensional consciousness, this consciousness that is beyond the 12th dimension, okay? Or that is omnipresent, it's omniscient, it's omnipotent. Okay, and yes, you can tap into it. Yes, everybody, you're based on harmonics, and so is the universe. So all you have to do is harmonize with the universe. Everybody. Now check this out. Milky Way has at least 46 billion Earth-sized planets, more than the total number of the grains of sand on all the Earth's beaches and deserts. And that is just in our galaxy. So if there's that many Earth-sized planets, just Earth-sized planets in our galaxy, and then we factor in the idea that essentially what creation is, what these planes of consciousness are essentially, is vortexes of energy where life forms are able to be created, experience reality, and then sent back through the feedback loop back to source. Okay? When we really grasp that, we understand that like, hold on a second, life isn't just occupied to just Earth-based planets. Life is like able to go on all planets that have like this electromagnetic field that surrounds it, this consciousness field, that makes it like an octave, a living octave of, you know, conscious reality. Wow. that, eh? That's some deep shit. So what's really important to keep in mind is that here on the Earth plane, we perceive reality based on less than 1% of the light spectrum, ladies and gentlemen. That means less than 1% of the light spectrum is the way that we see all of reality. And we're trying to extrapolate all sorts of like grand conclusions about the 99.9% when we're only perceiving less than 1% of that reality. Okay? So what that says to me is this, is that there are life forms on Venus, just like there are life forms on Jupiter. Okay, these life forms on Jupiter could be very well comprised of like crystalline electric storm structures that are conscious of themselves, moving around the gaseous vortex of the planet itself. It could be, you know, something like on Venus, we could have beings based entirely off of like sulfur or something like that. And the only reason why we can't perceive their physical body is because it is resonating just outside of this little spectrum here. They're like right here, and that means that we can't see them because they're not in here, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. That doesn't mean that they aren't as much of a reality as this little less than 1% is a reality for us. Okay? So essentially all of life, all of the planets, all of the stars, okay, is life being experienced in all of these different frequencies and octaves of resonance, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah. So life is everywhere. The universe is alive. It's been alive. It's going to stay alive. All right? God is life. Life is God. God is consciousness. Consciousness is God. Okay? We are that being. We are that consciousness. Okay, and we have the opportunity to harmonize with all of these different frequencies, and we can ascend up the ladder of harmonic vibration. Okay, now how we do that is this, okay, through something called the self-replication of phi. Now, for those of you who know what phi is, good on you. For those of you who don't know what phi is PHI. It is the basic ratio for which all of reality and all of nature is based off. It's what the Fibonacci spiral is based off of. It's what, you know, the tetrahedron is based off of. It's what all sacred geometric platonic solids are based off of. And essentially what it is this, okay? The universe, when the universe first started its feedback loop of light and information, it might as well have sent its conscious self, its self-aware consciousness, which is 1 phi, it sent that through the feedback loop and back again. And then guess what? It was aware. It had this self-reflective process that was like, oh yeah, wow, I am. Okay, so then another phi or another tetrahedron was stacked on top. Okay, and then this process kept happening and happening and happening over and over and over and over and over and over and over again as the energy moved through the feedback loop of light and information again and again and again and again and again. Okay, and it ends up like stacking on top of itself damn near infinitely. Okay, and it ends up creating, going from a first dimension to a second dimension to a third dimension to a fourth dimension to a fifth dimension. And as you can see, it just keeps going and going and going into these higher dimensional octaves of reality. Okay, so this is how this self-reflective process is happening on like a grander scale. Okay, and it is this self-reflective process that ETs, extraterrestrials, aliens, beings, non-human intelligences, they have tapped into this intelligence. They have tapped into this energetic source that is permeating all of creation. Okay, so it's really important to grasp how this all interrelates to what it is we were talking about before. Okay, what we were talking about before was the idea that come on now, I'm hitting the button, why don't you work it? Come on, dude, what's going on here? There we go. Okay, going back. All right, so what we're talking about here is essentially that this is like basic human earth consciousness, okay? You hear my dog drinking? Good boy, Rodney. This is basically three-dimensional base earth consciousness. This is what most people in culture are at, okay? And what we're talking about is the shaman is like the guy that is here, or the gal that is here. Shamans are not men, or are both men and women. They're not one or the other. And then the aliens, the extraterrestrial intelligences, are like the hyperdimensional consciousness that are interrelating between this shaman and the normal average individual, okay? So it's almost like this is this serious, you know, plane of consciousness here, this hyperdimensional octave of consciousness that is higher and above the Gaia mind, the solar mind, the logos of our solar system, okay? This is a whole star system consciousness, okay? This here is kind of like this here, okay? Or like this here. And it is a plane of consciousness that is multiple different consciousnesses, multiple different frequencies or octaves of self-awareness comprised to create a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts on that particular plane and dimension of reality, okay? And it is these hyperdimensional, highly intelligent, conscious beings, star beings, okay, that are aliens, that are what we see as unidentified aerial phenomena, or UFOs, okay? So with that said, it's really important to understand that this whole process is about the growth of harmonics. It's about the growth of this consciousness, this whole that is greater than the sum of its parts, this energy traveling to higher and higher octaves and higher dimensions of reality. So going beyond the 12th dimension and into the 13th, into the 14th, into the 15th, into the 16th, yada, yada, yada. Okay? It's this process going on over and over and over again. Now, what we have here is a magnet under something called ferrofluid. Okay? Now, what we're seeing here is numerous different pyramidal structure forms. Okay? These little cone forms. Now, the thing is, if we were to examine this image with a electromagnetic, what do they call those freaking things? Oh my gosh, the thing the Monopoly guy has. Oh my gosh, you know what I'm talking about? Hey, you're an examiner like that. What you would see is a flower of life pattern, and then the flower of life pattern is creating these tetrahedrons, creating these versions of phi, okay? Now, what the universe is doing is it is creating more and more of these versions of phi, as I explained here, okay? The complexification, okay? Becoming a grander and grander hyperdimensional state of awareness, okay? Within each new octave, each new frequency of vibration is represented by a new pyramid or a new version of phi coming into existence as a plane of consciousness that it has beings on it that like are self-aware, okay, that are able to send and receive the feedback loop of light and information, okay? So the whole growth process of the entire multiverse as a whole is basically this process here happening to create a hyperdimensional being that goes up the harmonic scales, up the octaves, to create higher and higher frequencies, to create higher and higher dimensional realms of reality that are then inhabited by this consciousness, by conscious beings, and that send and receive the feedback loop over and over and over again, and create higher and higher hyperdimensional states of consciousness again and again and again, okay? So how is this possible for humanity? Well, we don't just have 7 chakras. For those of you who know what the 7 chakra system is, good on you. For those of you who don't, the 7 chakra system are the 7 vortexes that are in our body, the 7 spinning wheels of energy. Each of them corresponds with a different organ and with different gland systems and stuff like that in the body. So these vortexes actually have physical resonances that are responsible for regulating the physical organisms itself as a whole, all of these harmonic frequencies working in conjunction with one another is what creates human consciousness, or this whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. Now, as we harmonize, as we get in tune with the harmonics of the universe, as we begin to embody these higher hyperdimensional states of consciousness, like our ancient ancestors did through their star ceremonies and the understanding of the feedback loop and all that stuff, okay?